and welcome back to the Law of Attraction for Writers podcast. I'm Suzanne Lieurance, and today I'd like to talk about something that affects almost every writer I know, whether they're just getting started or they've already published several books, and that is perfectionism. Now, at first glance, perfectionism doesn't sound like a bad thing. In fact, people often act like it's a compliment. They'll say things like, oh, she's such a perfectionist, or I'm such a perfectionist. It sounds like you're having high standards, right? It sounds like you care deeply about your work. And it sounds like you're wanting to create the very best book or article you possibly can. And there's nothing wrong with that. You do want to produce quality work. But there's a point where striving for excellence quietly becomes something else. It becomes fear. I've worked with writers for, 25, 35 years, something like that. I've noticed something interesting. The writers who succeed aren't necessarily the most talented. They aren't always the most experienced either. They're the ones who finish. The writers who struggle the most are often incredibly talented, and they've got wonderful ideas, and some of them write beautifully, and they have tremendous potential. But they keep waiting for their work to be good enough. So perfectionism whispers that just one more edit will finally make everything right. One more rewrite, take one more workshop, have one more critique. You can't believe the number of times people get work critiqued over and over and over and over. They've got to work on it one more month. They've got to do one more draft. And before they know it, months turn into years. Maybe you've experienced that yourself. Perhaps you've rewritten that first chapter dozens of times. Maybe you've spent hours researching instead of writing. I know I'm guilty of that because I love researching, and you can just go down that rabbit hole forever. And you feel like you're really working, you're really writing, but you're just stalling. Here's another thing people do. They organize their notes. They change fonts on the document. They format it again. Maybe they buy another writing course because they think they need a little more preparation before they can really begin. And another thing they do is they clean their desk off all the time. I always say Sunday night or at the end of every day, clean your desk off for the next day, and that be it. Don't constantly be redoing everything. You know, if you do that, you're just kind of fooling yourself. Because those things can feel productive, but most of the time they're just fear that makes you think you're working. So let's talk about why perfectionism is really fear in disguise, and what the law of attraction teaches us about it, and how you can begin letting go of perfection so you can finally finish what you've started. So one of the biggest misunderstandings about the law of attraction is the belief that we somehow have to become perfect before good things can happen. And that's not true. Because the law of attraction isn't responding to perfection. It's responding to the thoughts you consistently think. It's responding to the emotions you repeatedly feel, and the expectations you carry every day, and the beliefs you hold about yourself. And of course, it's responding to the actions those beliefs inspire. But think about what perfectionism is really saying. It's saying, I'm not ready. My writing isn't good enough. People will discover I'm not a real writer. I'll publish it later. I'll submit it when it's better. And those thoughts don't create confidence. They create hesitation. Every day you repeat those kind of thoughts, you're reinforcing the identity of someone who isn't ready. You're practicing being a writer who waits. Just think about that. You might even ask yourself, am I practicing being a writer who waits? Because the law of attraction faithfully responds to that pattern because that's the emotional frequency you're living in. On the other hand, a writer who believes this draft isn't perfect, but it's ready for the next step, creates a completely different emotional experience. That writer feels hopeful. They feel encouraged and motivated. And that's the writer who finishes manuscripts, submits proposals, publishes books, and gains experience. And progress creates confidence, And then confidence attracts more opportunities. That's how momentum is built. So just remember this: excellent is different from perfection. Excellence is healthy, perfectionism isn't. A writer pursuing excellence says, how can I make this chapter better? But the perfectionist asks, is this chapter perfect? One question comes from curiosity, the other comes from fear. The writers I admire most they're not perfectionists, they're finishers. So think about this: every published novel you've ever enjoyed started out as a messy first draft. And I'll tell you a personal story. Years ago, I worked with a writer who wanted to write a novel, and she was pretty talented, but she'd been rewriting the same opening chapter for months. And finally, I asked her, okay, what'll happen if chapter 1 isn't perfect? And she laughed and got kind of quiet and said, well, I guess I'll have to find out whether I can write the rest of the book. That was a real fear. She was afraid she wasn't going to be able to move forward. But once she recognized that fear, she went on and kept writing and finished the manuscript. It wasn't perfect, but it was finished, and only then could it continue to improve. So I've experienced this myself. Sometimes another revision is really worthwhile, but sometimes what we're really doing is trying to protect ourselves from criticism. And think about this too. You'll always find something you would have done differently. And the goal isn't to eliminate criticism. And that's a really good thing to remember. You might even write that on a card. My goal as a writer is not to eliminate criticism, because people are going to criticize stuff no matter what. So your goal is to keep creating regardless of the criticism. You just keep going. Here's a practical writing exercise. This week, think about one piece of writing you've been reluctant to finish, submit, or publish, and ask yourself these questions. What am I honestly afraid will happen if I let this go? What's the worst realistic outcome? What opportunity might I be missing by continuing to wait? Then replace one question. Instead of asking, is it perfect? Ask, is it ready for the next step? So here's your intention for this week. I'll put this in the description here so you know what to write on your index card or paper to put on your desk so you'll see it as you write. It's like your affirmation. I choose progress over perfection because every finished page moves me closer to the writing life I want. That's your intention for the week. I choose progress over perfection because every finished page moves me closer to the writing life I want. So imagine yourself a year from now. Would you rather have one flawless first chapter or a finished manuscript? Perfectionism promises to protect you from failure, but what it actually protects you from is success. Your readers don't need perfection. They need your voice. They need your stories and that message that only you can share. So don't try to be perfect. Just try to do the best you can at the moment, okay? So if today's episode resonated with you, I'd love to invite you to join us inside Monday Morning Manifestors. And that's where we meet every Monday on Zoom to set intentions, stay accountable, and encourage one another on the writing journey. And you can learn more about Monday Morning Manifestors at mondaymorningmanifestors.com or at writebythesea.com. So next week we'll talk about trusting the process. And until then, just keep writing, keep believing, and keep creating the writing life you truly want. Talk to you next week.